What's going on, YouTube? Bacon here, bringing you another video. This one going to be my week 7 through 10 matches for LD Minors Season 5. Coming out of last week 3-3 after picking up a win against Chess, so in pretty decent position to make playoffs, more or less in control of my own destiny here, because I do have some matchups against people that are kind of in contention for similar spots. Like at this point, Beardy has a similar record. I think he might have been 4-2 coming into this game. Sinos is also on my schedule coming up. I think he's sitting at 3-3 at this time as well, or something like that. So I've got a couple matches coming up against people, and Habada is coming up later in the set as well. I think it's my week 10 match, actually. So all those guys were kind of in contention for this playoff spot with me in some form or another, whether it was seeding or actually physically getting into the playoffs. All those guys were kind of in contention in that respect. So I figured if I could win like 3 out of 4, I'd be in pretty good position. And obviously I'd prefer to beat all of the opponents who I might see in playoffs going forward. So anyways, coming in here for week 7 match, Beardy's got a really threatening team. I've seen him run Sand Rush Dragazult multiple times to this point in the season, so I wasn't surprised to see that he'd bring that again. Spoiler alert, he does. But I'm also obviously prepped for a hustle version. Choice Scarf, I think, would make more sense against my team, although it still doesn't outspeed Aerodactyl. So I was anticipating the Sand Rush Dragazult. I felt like it was the bigger threat to my team, especially because he wouldn't be locking himself into a move with presumably like Choice Scarf or Choice Band. Choice Band I really don't have like a switch in for, but Choice Banded Bolt Beak, unless you're coming into your ground type, like that's pretty much the game that you play with Dragazult. So yeah, that thing's a pretty big threat. Greninja's a pretty big threat to my team. I don't have great answers for it. I figured something like Water Shuriken Gunk Shot would come this week. And then filler, probably like Dark Pulse U-Turn or something like that, or Hydro Pump instead of U-Turn. Also makes a lot of sense. Could run Spikes as well, but I didn't necessarily anticipate that coming in, just because Greninja is such a good offensive threat versus my team. Either Life Orb or Expert Belt is kind of what I was thinking for him this week. Tyranitar, it's a Mega Tyranitar actually, which means his turns of Sand will be limited with the Dragazult, so that's good to know. So he only can have the 5 turns of Sand with the Dragazult at max. Or 4, I guess, if you consider the turn that he switches out T-Tar, but having Girder around for the T-Tar is pretty important, I would say. I also have a pretty physically defensive Drapion this week that can help handle that thing. And obviously Lando Eye, that is Sheer Force Lando Eye, always a big threat to deal with. Aerodactyl's a decent switch-in. I am pretty bulky. I think it was like max HP on this Aerodactyl. So a pretty good matchup in that respect, I think. Overall, like I mentioned, the Dragazult's a pretty big threat, but I think overall I've got kind of the pieces that I need to deal with his team. This is just 4 attacks Girder, nothing too crazy. I think it's Drain Punch, Ice Punch, Mach Punch, and Knockoff. Mamoswine over here is Ice Shard, Earthquake, Knockoff, Icicle Crash. I didn't feel like I needed Stealth Rocks this week that much. Like I felt like it was going to be a pretty fast game, so I didn't think Stealth Rocks were going to really help me all that much here. So I decided to forego them and run Knockoff instead. I felt like removing items from things like the Araquanid upon switch-in was pretty useful. Obviously I could run Stone Edge for that, but Knockoff was just kind of generally more spammable, especially with the Bronzong around, which I am obviously expecting to be Levitate. Sylveon this week is kind of a weird set. I've got Hyper Voice, Mystical Fire, Heal Bell, and Calm Mind with Weakness Policy. So the idea here was basically to set up in front of the Bronzong. I figured he might go for like Stealth Rocks or something. Honestly, I thought he'd just lead Bronzong versus me because it has a really good matchup, but figured I could lead with Sylveon. If he leads Bronzong, I can just start setting up in his face. If he decides to Gyro Ball me, it's not going to do much because I am min-speed Sylveon to make the Gyro Balls do a little bit less damage. Heavy Slam would still do a good chunk, but I would live and prop my Weakness Policy, and nothing really wants to switch in on +3 Mystical Fire. I don't believe it knocks out especially defensive Bronzong, but all I need is a lot of chip off on Bronzong, and it would really open up like my Superior, my Arrow, my Mamoswine, all quite well if I were to get that chip off on the Bronzong. So I felt like Sylveon made more sense to try and break this game a little bit. I am reasonably physically defensive, again, to help take the heavy slams and gyro balls and such, and also to help take on Araquanid a little bit better in the 1v1. But I kind of went back and forth on the Hyper Voice versus Draining Kiss. Draining Kiss obviously gives me a lot more longevity, whereas Hyper Voice just means I'm getting more damage output. I ultimately went with Hyper Voice. I think the damage rolls are just a little bit better in a few scenarios, especially on things like Arachnid. So I did go with Hyper Voice. Probably would have liked to go with Draining Kiss in hindsight, but it is what it is. Next up here is Superior. We got Citrus Berry Superior, Knockoff, Leaf Storm, Dragon Pulse, and Defog. Defog just because I really don't like rocks this week. I need things to be able to live hits. Like Drapion is fairly physically defensive, so it can live a hit from the Dracozolt, but after rocks that gets a little bit suspect. Aerodactyl obviously doesn't appreciate taking rocks damage and hits from Lando Eye, so even in sand, I probably want to be able to keep that off the field. And I elected not to bring Synth this week just because he's got Sandstorm, so if I go for Synthesis, it's only going to get me 25% anyway. So Citrus Berry, by the way, is just tech for the Dracozolt, so I can come in, take a Bolt Beak, and as long as he's not like Adamant Choice Band, I mean, if he is Adamant Choice Band, I'll outspeed and be able to knock off the Choice Band. So basically the idea is I can always come in on to Dracozolt Bolt Beak and knock it off. If he was a Life Orb Hustle, or Life Orb Sand Rush variant, as he actually turns out to be, then he could KO me potentially with like Bolt Beak and a Fire Fang, but I really didn't think Fire Fang would be something he'd carry this week. I figured like Bolt Beak, Dragon Claw, Low Kick, and Earthquake. So yeah, it's the Serp set. Arrows, like I said, pretty close to max HP. Stone Edge, Ice Fang, Crunch, and Roost. Ice Fang, obviously, because the Lando is such a big threat to my team. Stone Edge hits pretty much everything for good neutral coverage, and then Crunch is just there for the Bronzong. Obviously going to do pretty good damage to that thing. Drapion here is Taunt, Swords Dance, Knockoff, Earthquake. Again, very physically defensive. Taunt is mostly to just stop the Bronzong from staying in if he's like Cobra Berry and getting up rocks. Stops the Arachnid from getting up webs if that's in front of me. And it's just generally pretty useful for shutting down some of the status users on his team. I think he had a couple more bulky Pokemon that he didn't end up bringing this week, but Swords Dance, Knockoff, Earthquake was really all the coverage I needed. I didn't feel like I needed Poison Jab this week. Obviously, Drapion's kind of fodder for Lando Eye if I go for Earthquake on a turn where he switches out of something like T-Tar, but otherwise, Drapion can get an SD up on a lot of stuff and pressure his team pretty well that way. So without further ado, let's get into the match here. Looking at lead matchup, like I said, I'm pretty sure he's going to lead Bronzong, so I'm just going to lead off with my Sylveon and try and take advantage of that right off the bat and get rid of this Bronzong. So he actually ends up leading with the Arachnid. I'm like, well, this is kind of a similar scenario. I can just Calm Mind up. One other thing I considered outside of Calm Mind weakness policy was Calm Mind Key Berry with Draining Kiss, but unfortunately I didn't end up bringing that, and also unfortunately I'm not going to quite pick up the 2-hit KO on Arachnid. I don't mind trading Sylveon for Arachnid because its job was more or less to do this and like maybe live a hit from Greninja, but Expert Belt Gunk Shot was doing way too much anyway, so I was fine trading for the Arachnid here. It means that there's going to be no webs on his side of the field, or on my side of the field rather, which, while you probably wouldn't want to bring webs for my team in general, still would have been somewhat annoying for my Drapion and my Mamoswine. Especially Mamoswine because it's built to outspeed this Tyranitar. Anyways, he's going to go out into T-Tar here and make a nice double into Dracozolt, predicting my Girder to want to come out. I obviously can live a hit because I'm kind of like mixed defensive, and Girder's really physically bulky, but I do have the Superior for this anyway, so I'm just going to go out and take that Bolt Beak. He is Life Orb, and as I mentioned, Sand Rush Dracozolt. So I'm just going to click Knockoff here. Like I mentioned, I don't think he'd have Fire Fang, so Knockoff seemed pretty free to me this turn, as I did expect the Bronzong to come out, and I'm able to take its leftovers. Here I'm pretty sure he's just going to go for Stealth Rocks, because my only way to remove them is Girder or Serp, which both generally don't like to run Defog very much. And as I mentioned, rocks are very annoying versus me, so I'm just going to go for Leaf Storm here and try and trade for the Bronzong a little bit. Wasn't sure if he'd have Toxic on this set or not. Thought he might run Earthquake for Metagross, but I guess it's possible that he still had it. Anyways, he Toxics me as I go for Leaf Storm, and he's just going to get rocks back up. I'm trying to get into a position where maybe I can keep rocks off the field, but at this point, Serp's not really doing anything for me anyways. As I mentioned, I don't have Synthesis because of the Sandstorm, so I felt like it was worth it to try and go for Defog there and see if he decided to not click rocks that turn. But he makes a smart play and gets him back up, as we're just going to trade Cert for Bronzong. So a little bit of 1 for 1 here at the beginning of the game, but I'm not too upset about taking those trades just because Girder and Mamoswine have really good matchups in the back. As long as I can get rid of the Greninja, Mamoswine looks phenomenal. And then on the other side, if I can get rid of the Lando, then Girder looks phenomenal. So out comes the Lando, unfortunately, on the blind switch. Girder had a good matchup versus the other three, so I figured it was worth a shot. But out comes the Lando on the switch, so I'm going to go out into Arrow here and take that Psychic and Roost up as he gets in his T-Tar. And he makes another nice double here, getting his Dracozolt. No, he gets Lando back in here, predicting probably either the Drapion or the Girder to want to come out. In either case, it's pretty good for him because he can just fire off a Psychic or an Earth Power. Here I figure, okay, the Sandstorm's up, and I've already shown Aerodactyl as my initial switch-in, so I didn't think he'd go for Earth Power there. I thought he'd just go for U-turn. And I really didn't want him U-turning and getting out into Dracozolt and basically forcing me to pick one at that stage of the game. Like, obviously, I could go Mamo on Bolt Beak, but that's kind of a risky proposition. So I really just didn't want the Lando U-turning there, and I felt like it's a pretty likely play for him to go for, but he did go for Earth Power and knock out my Drapion. Again, not super torn up about it, but I am running out of sacks here, and this is definitely going to be a sack-for-sack type of end game, so a little bit disappointed that I wasn't able to make that play correctly and get back out into the Aerodactyl, but here out comes the Greninja on my predictable Ice Shard, and here I'm like really in the back now because I'm not making plays at this stage. I've been a little bit too conservative, I would say, to this point in the match, but I have no choice but to go Girder here. I can't afford to throw out another sack, and what I can do is obviously bluff the Mach Punch here and go for Drain Punch, but there's really no reason for me to Mach Punch. Oh wait, I actually don't Drain Punch here. I double out into Mamoswine, right? Alright, so I get the Girder in, and like on turn 18, after I get the Girder in and I eat a Hydro Pump, I'm like, man, this is looking pretty grim. I don't know how I'm supposed to win this game, but while I'm sitting in front of the Greninja, I'm like, okay, the play is either Mach Punch or Drain Punch. Drain Punch isn't going to get me a lot back if he decides to go Landorus, which seems like a likely switch-in. So I figured I kind of had to go Mamoswine here and get that play right. And then I have to get this play right as well, which is either to Ice Shard to KO the Landorus, because he's surely not going into like T-Tar or Dracozolt, because that gains him nothing. So he's either going out into Greninja again, which he's already done once, or he's staying in with his Landorus here. So I decided to predict that he's going to stay in with his Landorus here, since he already got me on one Ice Shard play. I didn't think he'd go for a second. So I do get that play correct to KO the Landorus. Big threat gone. So Girder's looking really good if I can get some health back with the Drain Punch, which really just requires me to get it in on a free turn versus Tyranitar. So here I'm going to sack Arrow to the Greninja because Ice Shard is still pretty useful on the Mamoswine, and like I mentioned, I was pretty sure he was going to have Water Shuriken anyway, so there's no reason for me to stay in and try and get Chip off when he's already in Mach Punch range from Girder. So he's going to KO my Aerodactyl there. It's definitely the least useful member at this point in the match. And here is another play that I really need to get right. So obviously, if I Mach Punch and KO the Greninja, I'm in pretty good shape, because then he has to go out into Dracozolt to revenge me, and he's playing a 50-50 with Low Kick or Bolt Beak, because Low Kick's not going to knock out pretty physically defensive Girder from 31%. There's just no way. And if he goes out into Dracozolt and gives me damage on it, then Ice Shard will KO Dracozolt from whatever range. So basically, like, long and short, if he gives me Greninja, he has to revenge me with Dracozolt, more or less, because Tyranitar is not going to be able to revenge kill me, and I'm just going to Drain Punch all my health back. But if he doesn't give me Greninja, the only possible switch-ins that he could have are T-Tar and Dracozolt, in which case Drain Punch is obviously the play for me. So what I decided to do is go off the fact that he would switch and save Greninja, because he should realize how big of a threat Mamo is to the rest of his team if he allows it to stay around. Or if he allows the Greninja to go down, because he does have Water Shuriken, like I mentioned, to out-prioritize me. So I decided to make the play, predicting him to switch out. I do click Drain Punch here, and I catch the T-Tar upon switch-in, which is better than I'd hoped for. I thought he'd probably go Dracozolt on the Mach Punch, but him going Tyranitar is best-case scenario for me, because I get a ton of health back, and I KO the Tyranitar. And now Dracozolt is in range of Ice Shard plus Mach Punch after a Life Orb hit. So what I'm going to do here is go out into Mamoswine. Again, we've got another 50-50 on that turn. It's like, is he going to click Dragon Claw, Bolt Beak, or Low Kick? Like, Dragon Claw didn't knock out Girder, but he might not have known that based on not really having seen any of my calcs yet, because I just kind of O-code the Tyranitar with Drain Punch. So he doesn't know how offensive my girder is. So Bolt Beak is pretty much the only thing that he should know has a chance to kill me. Everything else is pretty unlikely to kill me. And if I just stay in there to Mach Punch, obviously that's not going to kill me either, but because I'll be going before the Bolt Beak. But here I decide he's got to go for Bolt Beak this turn. I'm going to make the play into Mamoswine, and if he predicts it and low kicks me, then well played, you know. So I decided to make the play out into Mamoswine, as he does go for Bolt Beak, so I get that play right too. And then I go for Ice Shard here to pick off the damage that I need on Dracozolt. As I mentioned, Ice Shard plus Life Orb damage puts him in range guaranteed of Mach Punch from Girder, which means Girder is actually going to be able to clean up this game with Mach Punch. So it was definitely looking really grim, like mid-game, around turn 18 or so, when I took that Hydro Pump from Greninja. I was like, I don't know if I can win this game, and I kind of need to, given where we are at this point in the season. So the last few turns definitely took a lot more thinking time than the first half of the game. Like, first half of the game, we were clicking pretty fast through our turns, and then towards the end of the game, there was like a lot of thinking involved on all these 50-50s. Like, is he going to go T-Tar or Dracozolt, or is he going to leave the Greninja in? And like, just a lot of back and forth on the back end. You guys saw for yourselves. So really happy I was able to get all those 50-50s right down the stretch and come out with the W here. A really tough game, really good game to Beardy, and he ends up making playoffs anyway, regardless. I think he was actually a higher seed than me in the end. So yeah, that's my week 7 match. Looking ahead to week 8, we've got Virgie here. And Virgie's got some threats, most notably like the Volcarona and Zygarde are pretty problematic for my team. And Primarina kind of just spams Scald versus me. Like, I do have the Superior, but that's not going to really appreciate something like a Specs Moonblast. So that's pretty tough offensive matchup versus, or defensive matchup versus the Volcarona and the Primarina. Zygarde's always a problem to deal with. Banded Thousand Arrows hits my team pretty hard, or like a DD Iron Tail set to hit like something like Sylveon. Also seemed relatively likely to me, so Zygarde definitely a problem as well. Otherwise, I feel like I could handle his offensive threats decently well, but he's got, you know, I hate playing against HO because they've got so many freaking threats to deal with, and usually your team's not going to have like a guaranteed way to deal with all of them. So looking at the team builder here, I had a Wing Attack on my Aerodactyl just because I was pretty concerned about what the Mienshao was going to be doing to me. Banded High Jump Kick is really difficult for my team to switch into, and I thought if he brings that, I'm pretty much screwed. So wanted to make sure I had Wing Attack, so I'm switching out as infrequently as possible versus the Mienshao. Oh wait, no, I didn't have Wing Attack this week. What the heck? Oh, I had Stone Edge, Crunch, Ice Fang. Oh, that's right. I opted for Ice Fang over Wing Attack just because I felt like I was a little more threatened by the Zygarde than I was the Mienshao. And he should have to predict me to have a Wing Attack anyways. But yeah, Stone Edge, Crunch, Ice Fang, and last move's Dragon Dance here. Just because +1 arrow really puts a number in on his team. Like I mentioned, he is running HO, or he just has HO. So like if I get up +1 here, I'm obviously going to outspeed any potential Choice Scarfers because I'm the fastest thing on the field anyway. And I can really put the hurt in on his team. Just with like a little bit of chip off on Jirachi, I can really put the hurt in on his team. And I guess I'd need a little bit off on Mienshao as well, unless I'm able to live a hit. I've got Life Orb, Mamoswine, Dual Stab, with, instead of Earthquake, I'm running a High Horsepower just because of the Tapu Bulu. But Dual Stab, Ice Shard, Ice Crash, and High Horsepower with Stealth Rocks. Stealth Rock just to kind of get the chip off that I need for Arrow to do the work late game. Shuka Berry, Metagross, Ice Punch to hit the Zygarde, Rock Slide to hit the Volcarona, Earthquake to hit the Jirachi, and then Meteor Mash just for everything else. A really good switch into Tapu Bulu, which does now get, I can't remember if it's High Horsepower or Stomping Tantrum, but SD Bulu could have been somewhat problematic if he hit me with one of those after a +2, so Shuka Berry is there for that and for Zygarde. Choice Scarf Latias just because I felt like something needed to outspeed the +1s, so the Volcarona and the Zygarde. Something needed to be able to outspeed those. So we got Ice Beam and Psyshock to hit those two things. Drapeon's Toxic Spikes because they're really good versus him in this matchup. He doesn't have a grounded poison type, so those are really going to put in work. Physically defensive again also to help out with the Tapu Bulu, and I do live a hit from the Mienshao, unless I think he was Adamant. High Jump Kick, Knockoff Poison Jab, and Whirlwind specifically for the Volcarona. And then lastly, I've got Superior, Leaf Storm, Glare, Leech Seed, and Knockoff. pretty self-explanatory superior set. I didn't feel like I needed synthesis again this week, just because the Tapu Bulu is going to be healing me up pretty well anyways. And the whole point of the superior is just get some chip, get some status, and then again clean later with the Aerodactyl. So let's get right into the match here. Looking at lead matchup, I just want to lead Drapion and get up T-Spike. Like T-Spike, as I mentioned, is super good versus team, so there's really no reason for me to not do that. So Drapion comes out, as I believe he ends up leading with the Jirachi. Yep, leads with the Jirachi, so that works out really well for me. He can get up Stealth Rocks all he wants. T-Spike are way better for me than Stealth Rock are for him. So I'm just going to be able to stay in here and click Knock Off as he goes for an Iron Head, and he does manage to flinch me. So a little bit of a bummer, but he's not going to stay in after seeing that damage and continue to try to flinch me, especially after seeing my Black Sludge. So I'm going to go for Knock Off here again, as he turns out to be Lumberry Mienshao, which is really interesting tech, really good prep on his end. I don't know if that was specifically for T-Spikes, but it makes this Mienshao pretty threatening, so I actually just clicked Whirlwind here. I didn't predict him to go for SD, but I figured, okay, I live whatever he goes for. Whirlwind here is going to mean he gets poisoned later, and that's going to help me out in the long run. So I decided to Whirlwind there as I get out the Volcarona, and I'm just going to click Knock Off. I've already shown Whirlwind, so he's not going to set up in my face. And Drapion here is able to get some good chip off on the Mienshao and actually just stay in to click Poison Jab. After I've seen SD, I'm pretty sure he's not going to be high jump kick, so I'm just going to stay in here, click Poison Jab, knowing that I live pretty much whatever hit he's going to go for. And with the defense drops, he actually is going to drop to Poison afterwards. So Mienshao's dead, pretty big threat gone, and I've still got my T-Spike up, which is amazing for me. I'm going to keep my Drapion around, mostly for the Jirachi, but also to help with Tapu Bulu. With Grassy Terrain, I should be able to get some recovery back pretty well on my Drapion, so not too worried about that. He does reveal Toxic on Zygarde, but that's really not too indicative to me of what his set is going to be at this stage of the match, so I'm just going to go out into Superior here and click Knock Off. Knock Off's pretty free. I'm going to take an item from whatever he decides to go into since he doesn't have a Mega. So Knock Off's fine with me there. Bulu comes out, and this is an always Metagross play. Even if he goes for like the ground move on the switch in, I do have the Shuka Berry, and his Grassy Terrain recovery is going to help me out. And I can just start firing off attacks here. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I get the Metagross out here as he goes for a Horn Leech. Oh no, I double into Drapion this turn. Huh. I don't really know what I was predicting that turn, doubling into the Drapion, but maybe Jirachi to want to come out, but I'm going to get out my Drapion here, and I figured if there was any turn for him to try and set up, this would be it. So I'm going to click Whirlwind. Maybe he thought I would save my Drapion there and just go Arrow or something like that, but I figured if there's any turn to try it, that was the turn to try it and go for Whirlwind, so, or I should go for Whirlwind that turn. So I'm able to get out the Bulu, which obviously doesn't want to stay in on me, and because I'm getting so much recovery from my Black Sludge and Grassy Terrain, I have no problem just staying in here to click Poison Jab. So that's exactly what I'm going to do, and you can see my Drapion's really healthy at this point, and is absolutely putting in work this game. So he switches out of the Zygarde into Bulu as I predict that and stay in and go for Knock Off. If I had really hard predicted Bulu, I guess I could have clicked Poison Jab, but Knock Off was pretty free there. He already seems to be more of a defensive type of Zygarde set, so I just wanted to remove whatever item he had. And double Knock Off was really free here because he's not going to stay with Bulu and let me Poison Jab him. So Drapion's actually back up to full health. Jirachi's just come in. He does reveal the Wish, but I'm going to be able to knock him off again. Do some pretty good damage. In case this is like a roll, I figure he might go for Protect here, and that's a pretty good opportunity for me to get some free recovery on my Metagross with the Grassy Terrain, but he just goes for Iron Head there as I come in, and he does relatively little to me. Now, my best move to hit this thing is Earthquake, which is kind of a bummer, but it's still going to do decent damage even in terrain, so I don't mind clicking it here as he goes for another Iron Head on the terrain. And like I mentioned, I really haven't lost much with my Metagross. It's mostly coming in on Tapu Bulu anyways, so it's going to be getting recovery passively anyway. So just going to spam Earthquake here as he goes out into the Volcarona. I'm like, okay, again, this is a situation where he's not going to click the Fire move because I do have the Aerodactyl in the back. He's probably going to try and heal this thing up, and if he doesn't heal it up, I'm in really good position. So I go for Rock Slide here on the Roost, and I'm able to KO the Volcarona, which puts me in excellent position. And then the Primarina comes out, and really my only switch in, like I mentioned at the pregame, is the Superior. It doesn't appear to be Specs Primarina, which is good for me, but it just goes for Scald there, does a little bit to my Serp as I go for a Leaf Storm this turn. Really, I just need chip on Primarina, and Aerodactyl can more or less win this game if I can get +1, which I should be able to do on the Zygarde, or potentially even the Jirachi, since he seems to be more of a defensive set, assuming he's not carrying T-Wave. So I go out into the Metagross again, always Metagross on top of Bulu. pretty much a free Meteor Mash every time I come in. And this time he basically has to pick a sack. If he goes out into the Jirachi, he's going to take a good chunk of damage, and then I can just Earthquake it anyway a couple times as he goes for Wish, and he doesn't appear to have Protect. So just going to Meteor Match here, pick up my KO on the Tapu Bulu. I do get an attack raise, which is pretty cool, but also, like, if I hadn't gotten the attack raise, I probably would have just sacked Superior here on this Scald, but instead I lose out on my Metagross, which was still actually pretty good for me. It could deal really well with Jirachi, and with the Shuka Berry I could live 1,000 arrows and hit the Zygarde with an Ice Punch. So now it's a little bit shady versus Jirachi, but I'm just going to go out into the Latios here. Clicking Shadow Ball just says, like, don't go into Jirachi. So he goes out into Zygarde here. I'm like, okay, I can just spam Shadow Ball a couple times at this thing. Even if he wants to set up, the Shadow Ball damage plus poison damage should be fine. But he turns out to be Block Rest Zygarde. So he's actually going to trap my Latios here, because I am Choice Scarf as I'm going for Shadow Balls here. And he's able to trap me with Block Toxic and Rest. So that's kind of a bummer, but also, like, it's not a setup variant of Zygarde, so that's great for me. I guess setup didn't make a ton of sense. I actually revealed Confide here, so he didn't even have 1,000 arrows. Obviously, I guess setup's not that great versus me when I have a Mamoswine, but very glad to see that it was that kind of Zygarde set and not a more standard setup type. Anyways, I'm going to go out into my Mamoswine here, which does outspeed Adamant Zygarde, and again, he looks pretty bulky, so I'm just going to click High Horsepower to deny him going into Jirachi, and then sack Mamoswine to get a free switch into my Aerodactyl. That was kind of my 100% win. Was to sack, click High Horsepower, I guess 95% win. No, still 100% win, because I go out here, click Crunch, and do way too much damage to him for him to Wish Up on me. So he's going to Iron Head here, and as I mentioned, he's a more, I'm a pretty bulky Aerodactyl, and it looks like he's a more defensive variant of Jirachi, so Crunch is going to be able to pick up the 2-hit KO no problem. And we win another game, so we're sitting at 5-3 now, looking pretty decent for playoffs going forward, for sure. But a good game to Virgie. This was another one where I felt like my matchup was just really good. Having the Toxic Spike up was really difficult for his team to deal with, and Drapion put in a ton of work this game. Next up, we got Xenos here. Xenos doesn't have a Dark type, so, like, right off the bat, we're running Stored Power Latios. I actually elected to run Combine Stored Power Roost with Safeguard. Safeguard allows me to 1v1 Toxic variants of the Milotic and the Registeel. It also means if the Milotic has, like, Ice Beam, it's not going to be able to freeze me if I had the Safeguard up. Similarly, Safeguard is nice for preventing Spore from Amoonguss or from getting Sludge Bomb poisoned or anything like that. Discharge parried by the Vikavolt. Pretty much any kind of status is not going to happen versus me. So it's weakness policy to take. I do take a Hyper Voice if I'm +1 from the Gardevoir. So weakness policy, Latios. Also procs on U-Turn from Tornadus, knockoff from Tornadus, Ice Beam from Milotic, Bug Buzz from Vikavolt. There's a lot of stuff that could proc my weakness policy, and if I get that thing active, I could just click Store Power and pick up a KO, as long as I outspeed the thing that I'm in front of. So that's the 7 Latios. I believe it's a pretty standard Pain Split dual stab type of Rotom this week with Will-O-Wisp. Will-O-Wisp just seemed better than me to me over Toxic, just because Guaranteed Chip on things like Amoonguss and the Registeel seemed worth it. Really speedy Jellicent with Scald Hex. Scald obviously to get the burns off in conjunction with Rotom's Will-O-Wisp, and then Hex is going to take advantage of that pretty well. And the speedy substitute means that I can sub up in front of the Milotic as long as he's not running more than, like, I think 20 speed it was. I can sub up in front of the Milotic pretty freely. Taunt Roost Aerodactyl with Earthquake. And Wing Attack. I didn't feel like I needed Stone Edge this week that badly, so I like to go for Wing Attack for the better damage against Amoonguss. Dual Stab, pretty standard type of Mamoswine with Stealth Rocks. And then normal Gem Explosion Metagross to try and lure the Milotic, which was a huge problem for my team. So getting right into it at lead, I had a lot of options that I could lead with, but I felt like Aerodactyl was kind of the best to make sure I kept rocks off from the Registeel, since I do have Taunt. So I'm just going to lead Aerodactyl here, get my Mega off nice and early. That makes me a pretty decent switch into the Gardevoir later as well, because I am pretty bulky on the special side. But I am able to Wing Attack here as he just goes out into the Registeel, which is a fine play for him, but I do have the Taunt to shut that thing down. So worst thing he can do to me is Iron Head, and I'm not too concerned about that. But I am going to Taunt here, as he goes out into the Registeel. And here I'm going to switch into Rotom Heat because there's really nothing he can do to Rotom Heat with a taunted Registeel, as he ends up going to Tornadus, which is more or less just as good for me. He decides to knock off here and gets rid of my boots. Not a huge problem if I am able to keep rocks off. I also have the Pain Split, so taking rocks damage isn't the end of the world, since I do have some longevity this game. He also reveals the Toxic on Tornadus, which is definitely something I wasn't expecting. I was thinking kind of like a Heat Wave, Hurricane, U-Turn type of set. But he does reveal the Toxic, so that's kind of a bummer for my Rotom Heat. But eventually he's got to switch out this Tornado, so I'm just going to keep spamming Will-O-Wisp because it's free chip on his team, and it's going to help my Hexes in the long run. So I go for Will-O-Wisp there. Unfortunately miss. I don't know how much that mattered in the long run, but obviously chip is better than no chip since I don't have Toxic on this team. Like, that's the best kind of chip that I'm going to get off residually on Gardevoir. But here I guaranteed live any hit he wants to go for, so I just go for Pain Split. Get some additional damage off on the guard, and then go out into the Aerodactyl since he's clearly not letting me go Metagross on this thing by clicking Shadow Ball twice. So I go out to my Aerodactyl here and click Wing Attack. Wing Attack again is pretty free because even if he goes into Registeel, I can just taunt him. Here I'm going to taunt the Milotic. You could say it's kind of a misplay since I've already shown it, and obviously I'm risking burn. But I really wanted to keep the Milotic low because, like I mentioned, that thing's a huge problem for my team, and he is guaranteed in range of normal Gem Explosion for my Metagross now. So that's basically all I wanted there. And with a taunted Milotic, he makes the correct play and goes into Vikavolt to catch my Jellicent, which is really nice by him. And then clicks Energy Ball, predicting my Mamoswine to come out. Also very nice by him, but I don't mind sacking off Mamoswine here. It's not super important to me that I keep it around, and because I am Life Orb at that point, I only have one hit left anyway. So I'm just going to take my rocks as I can get him because I know he's going to go Milotic, and there's not a whole lot I can do to punish that. So I go for rocks here as Milotic comes in, and here's where the speed on Jellicent's definitely going to work out in my favor. He goes for Toxic, thinking it's pretty free there because normally you would outspeed a Jellicent with a Milotic, but in this case I do have that speed. I'm just going to be able to throw off a Hex here pretty freely. He looks like a pretty bulky Tornadus, just based on that damage. I do see boots upon switching, but it looks pretty bulky. He's able to take that Hex pretty well, but there's not a whole lot he can do to me, so I'm just going to spam Hex in his face as he does swap out into the Amoonguss here, and this will give me some opportunities to fish for a Scald Burn. So looking at that damage, it appears to be Assault Vest Amoonguss because it only did 10. So I'm going to Scald here, try to fish for a burn on the Amoonguss. Don't get it the first time, but I'm expecting him to not want to let me get out for free into my Rotom Heat here. So what I'm going to actually do is go for another substitute as he goes for Sludge Bomb, and this is going to give me a second opportunity to fish for a Scald Burn with relatively minimal risk on my end. Like, if he ended up Giga Draining again, you know, so what? I'm still at a pretty healthy range with my Jellicent, but because he did Sludge Bomb, I got another opportunity to fish. Unfortunately, don't get it again, but eventually we'll get that burn on the Amoonguss, and that's kind of what I'm playing off of. It also kind of conditions him here to go for Giga Drain over Sludge Bomb on my Rotom Heat switch-in, and this is a pretty free Pain Split. Even if he goes Gardevoir, that's still decent for me, but he likes to stay in with the Amoonguss and gives me a pretty fat chunk of HP back, and a good bit of chip off on the Amoonguss, so I'm still about back where I was, but the Amoonguss being much lower is really nice for me. So here he's either going for another Sludge Bomb or he's switching out for sure. So I decided to go out into the Metagross trying to catch anything on the switch-in because Metagross has a really good matchup against pretty much everything else. But let me slow this down a little bit. I'm going a little bit fast. So yeah, I get out into the Metagross as he goes for another Sludge Bomb because he elected to stay in, and I don't want to risk him having like Stomping Tantrum or Foul Play, especially because the Sludge Bomb just failed. I'm going to switch back out into Rotom Heat, predicting him to go for one of those things, but instead he just goes out into the Milotic as I catch him with a Discharge with my Rotom Heat. So I will absolutely take that trade, Rotom Heat for Milotic. Like, as good as Rotom Heat is versus team, like you can see it pretty much walls Torn, Vikavolt, Registeel, Amoonguss, as long as I'm like Pain Splitting up and switching out enough to reset the Toxic. Getting rid of my Milotic is just so huge for me. It opens up my Metagross, it opens up my Aerodactyl really well for a late game clean. So I'm going to go back out to Jellicent here. Obviously, he can't just let me sub for free, really, but I don't want him getting a recover off here, so I have to go out into the Jellicent and click Hex. If he switched out, so be it. The Milotic could never come in again unless it was on a free switch, and it is slower than everything on my team, so I had to make sure I picked up the KO on Milotic by clicking Hex there. So yes, I could have Scalded, but I'm almost certain he clicked Recover that turn, hoping for me to choke and go for a sub there. So anyways, The Registeel comes out, and I could sub on this, but then I've got 2 Pokemon that are going to die to Stealth Rocks with my Arrow and my Mamoswine being so low. I guess I probably should have gone Mamoswine. It would have put on a little more pressure than Arrow does. But what I was thinking here was, okay, Mamo's dead to Rocks anyway, or a Life Orb hit. I thought maybe I could keep my Arrow around because I was expecting him to just have like Seismic Toss or something. But it turns out he does have the Iron Head, which means I'm not going to be able to roost in this thing's face, unfortunately. So I'm just going to take my damage where I can get it. I'm going to click Earthquake this turn and get some chip off on the Registeel. So Earthquake here, he's going to Iron Head me again this turn, but I do a sizable chunk, so it looks like a more specially defensive Registeel this game, probably to deal with my Latios, as he's going to be able to KO me with the Iron Head. So here I could go out into Metagross and click Earthquake, but that kind of invites in the Vikavolt to some extent. What I'd rather do is just use this as my opportunity to set up with my Latios. There's no way he's going to predict Safeguard, which means he should absolutely go for Toxic. It appears that he has Iron Head to guaranteed... I guess Seismic Toss would do the same thing, but Iron Head should break my sub anyway if I were sub Calm Mind. So he should absolutely go for Toxic here. No doubt in my mind that's what he's going to do. So I click the Safeguard, and now we're in business. So I can start Calm Minding in front of this Registeel. I do beat it 1v1. As we've seen, Iron Head's his best move that can hit me, and that's going to do pitiful damage because it's a Registeel. So I'm just going to Calm Mind up here as he goes out into the Amoonguss. And like, I do know this thing is AV, but okay, what moves is he going to have? He's going to have Foul Play, maybe also Stomping Tantrum. He's already shown Giga Drain and Sludge Bomb. Let's scout out if he has Clear Smog. It's kind of a low-risk play for me to figure that out because I can always go into Metagross later, but he does reveal the Clear Smog here, unfortunately, into my Latios, so it's going to make it a little bit more difficult. I'm like, okay, well now I can just Calm Mind again. If he doesn't keep spamming Clear Smog at me, I can just click Stored Power. Like, +1 Stored Power is still going to be, +1/+1 Stored Power is still going to do damage, but instead I get a crazy good turn, and instead of clicking Clear Smog, he clicks Foul Play and procs my Weakness Policy. So now Stored Power guarantees me a KO, and nothing on his team can revenge kill me. I outspeed and KO Gardevoir, I outspeed and KO the Vikavolt, and I 1v1 the Registeel, as we've seen already. So he has to go out into the Tornadus here because my Safeguard is dropped, and he's going to click Toxic here. I guess I could have just clicked Stored Power this turn and taken my KO, but I wanted to be as healthy as possible to ensure that this Latios picks up as many as possible. He goes for Toxic here and misses. I guess kind of you can call it justice for the Willow miss, but it's definitely bad for him to miss that Toxic because now my timer is extended that much more, and when he's basically in a pick your sack situation, that's no bueno for him. So we're going to click Stored Power here, obviously, to take out this Tornadus. And I get at least one more kill with this Latios, like guaranteed. Just by clicking Stored Power over and over again, I'm going to get at least one more kill with this thing. So he's going to bring out the Registeel here. I guess Protect is reasonably obvious this turn, but I didn't feel like there was really a play that I could do to take advantage of a Protect. Like, getting one extra Calm Mind's not going to help me that much at this stage because I'm already doing so much damage with the Stored Power, and getting one Calm Mind off isn't going to get me to KO this Registeel from this range. So I'm just going to click the button again this turn as he goes for Protect, which is fine by me. He is chipping me down a little bit with this Toxic damage, but like I said, Latios really just needs to break through here, and then Metagross can potentially clean later. So I'm just going to click the Stored Power this turn, get some big damage off on this Registeel. As I mentioned, going for a Calm Mind there, I don't think would have gotten me enough damage off anyways to KO. So he's going to go for Iron Head this turn, chip me down a little bit further. Here I'm going to go for a Roost, predicting him to go for another Protect. He makes a really nice play here and goes for another Iron Head instead, and is able to keep me relatively low on my Latios. So good play on his end, going for the Iron Head this turn to get some more chip off. And now I'm like, okay, I've already done a good deal with Latios. I don't care too much if I go for Roost here and he goes for another Iron Head, because I'm still going to live that extra turn of Toxic. But I was pretty sure since he got me the previous turn, similar to the situation with Beardy, he was going to go for the safer play this turn and go for Protect. So I do get a Roost off there on his Protect, and now I get another KO with Stored Power. So basically he has to sack something here and then go back into Registeel and click Protect again. So I'm just going to click Stored Power here, pick up my KO, take out the Gardevoir, which is pretty nice in general, but he kind of needs Vikavolt to win if he has any chance of winning. So I'm not surprised that he decided to make that play. And then I take a little bit more Toxic Chip again with the Latios. At this stage, I'm pretty sure that the Metagross wins by just Earthquaking the Registeel and then booming on the Vikavolt, so I have no downside to just clicking Stored Power this turn. If he wants to... Oh, wait. Why did I not click Storm Power? Oh, I was trying to save differential. That's what that was. I knew he'd already revealed that he really couldn't touch me with this Metagross, and he's either going for Iron Head or Protect here, so with the Registeel. So going out to Metagross is pretty free. Again, I think I win with Earthquake into Explosion at this point, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click Earthquake here, knock out the Registeel, and then the Vikavolt going to come out on the following turn, and I'm going to be able to boom on that thing. If he was like max Vikavolt, I think this was still a rolled KO. Pretty in my favor. I think the min roll was like 94 on max, and I don't think he would have been max versus me. But even if he was, Explosion still would have put him in range of a Scald from Jellicent or a Stored Power from Latios. So unless he predicted that, went for Roost on the Explosion, and then lived the Explosion, I was good. So boom that turn, get the win. Nice 3-0 there to put us at 6-3. So coming into the final week, I still wasn't guaranteed in playoffs at this point versus Hob here. If I beat Habita, I think he was actually eliminated from playoff contention, because that might have been 4 losses and losing tiebreaker for him, if I recall correctly. But I can obviously still get in with a loss because my record's pretty good at this stage, and I have head-to-head on a couple key matchups, but still obviously would prefer to win this game. So his team's also got some massive threats, like Coco versus my team just has a field day. My only electric resists are Latios, which obviously doesn't appreciate Play Rough, Rotom Heat, which really doesn't do much back if he's like a calm mindset, and the Superior, which doesn't appreciate fairy moves that much either, and really isn't that reliable in the long run versus Coco. So definitely a difficult matchup here. He's also got the Moltres to deal with Superior anyways, so I didn't feel like Serp had a very good matchup this week. What I elected to do instead was bring kind of some jank. Let's call it tech, not jank. We got Choice Scarf Mamoswine with Icicle Spear, so you'll see in a little bit how this works out. But the idea with Icicle Spear was I was pretty sure he would be sub Garchomp to try and take advantage of Will-O-Wisp or Toxic Rotom. Like 99% sure he was going to run sub Garchomp this week, so Icicle Spears to take advantage of that. Plus, I didn't really feel like I needed Icicle Crash versus Icicle Spear, so actually, I think I ran both in this instance because I have Choice Scarf. So that's the Mamo set. Pretty standard Vikavolt. I believe it was foul play still to break subs on Garchomp, but again, I wasn't anticipating him to think that, so I figured Icicle Spear on Mamo was a nice backup. The Metagross is pretty standard. Stealth Rock Toxic to try and help deal with the Necrozma to some extent. Reasonably physically defensive or mixed defensive Drapion with sub Swords Dance. The idea being that I can sub up on Aloe and it can't break my sub. I can sub up on Licky Licky and it can't break my sub. And he doesn't want to stay in with the Necrozma. I mean, I figure Aloe is probably his primary switch into Drapion. So if I can get a sub up and start SDing, I can be in some really good shape here. Because like I mentioned, uninvested Licky Licky and Aloe Momola aren't going to be breaking my sub with anything. Liquidation Scald, nothing from Aloe is breaking that substitute. So I felt like that Drapion set had a really good matchup in this one. We've got Calm Mind, Dual Stab on the Latios with Life Orb. And I believe this was Dragon Dance Arrow again. Earthquake Ice Fang, if I'm not mistaken, with Stone Edge. Oh no, it was Roost, not Dragon Dance, on this Aerodactyl. So yeah, that's the team this week. Let's get right into it. At lead matchup, I've got a few options, as I usually do, but I'm just going to lead off with Rotom Heat. It matches up really well against most of his team, and I can Volt Switch out on quite a bit. As he gets the Garchomp in here, so turn 1, turn 2, like exactly as I had prepped for during going into this game. As I mentioned, I did have Foul Play, so I could break this sub from Garchomp if I really wanted to stay in, but I felt like it was important to keep Rotom Heat healthy to help deal to some extent with Tapu Koko and the Moltres, because as I mentioned, I do have Toxic as well. So figure go right out into Mamoswine. He's definitely clicking either Substitute or Zelthrox here. He likes to click Substitute, and this is what the Icicle Spear is for. This is why we have it, and we are going to pick up that KO on Garchomp. I obviously would have been really upset if I only got 2 hits there, but odds are in my favor to get 3, so we're able to KO the Garchomp with the Moltres, which is really nice for me. With the Mamoswine, which is really nice for me. He goes out into Moltres to Revenge and just clicks Toxic on the Rotom Heat coming in, which was probably pretty obvious since I do resist its Dual Stab. But I'm just going to throw off a Toxic on my own here. He goes for Roost, predicting me to be faster and go for Volt Switch. But getting a Toxic off on Moltres, getting a timer on that thing is really nice for my Metagross. So I'm just going to double Toxic here because he has no switch-ins, and I don't really expect him to stay in and eat a Discharge or Volt Switch or anything from my Rotom Heat as he gets into the Licky Licky. So turn 6 here, I'm like, okay, he's got to be going for Heal Bell if he has it, right? If you have Heal Bell, that is the turn you click it, to get rid of it off the Moltres and to get rid of it off the Licky Licky. So I figure I could potentially use this as my opportunity to get in Drapion and substitute in this thing's face. As I mentioned, unboosted or uninvested Licky Licky is not breaking my substitute with Body Slam. So I decided to go for that. He unfortunately goes for Body Slam that turn, which I guess does reveal to me that he probably doesn't have Heal Bell, but unfortunately he gets the pair off, and that really sucks for my Drapion because now I can't sub in this thing's face, or I guess I could sub in this thing's face, but as he goes Aloe, I get fully paralyzed. So not only am I now slower than everything with my paralysis, but I'm not even able to get the substitute off on the Alomomola switch in, which still would have allowed me to do my thing, like assuming I don't get full parrot on certain turns, would have allowed me to potentially do my thing, but I risked the Body Slam parrot coming in on the Licky Licky. That's just kind of the way it is sometimes. Sucks that it happened that turn, but what are you going to do? So otherwise, I think this Drapion would have really, really gone in. Even if I just had taken the Body Slam and not gotten paired, this Drapion would have super gone in, I think, versus team. Because as you can see, he's not breaking my sub. As I go for Sword Stance here, could have gone all the way to +6 and started to run train a little bit, but unfortunately not going to be the case. I'm just going to settle for taking the item from the Aloe, because I'm like, I'm playing around with full paras at this point. I really don't want to do that, so just going to go for the knockoff there, get some damage, and then go for Earthquake. Not really sure why I clicked an Earthquake there over another knockoff, but I'm just going to SD again, as I know a Liquidation is not going to 2-hit KO me, and I want to get as much damage off on this Aloe as possible before he KOs me, because, like I mentioned, Paralyzed Drapion's really not doing a whole lot for me this game, or at least so I thought. Because I figured the Necrozma would have some kind of ground coverage for it, since that hits both Drapion and Metagross, so I was kind of surprised to see what you're going to end up seeing in a little bit here, but I'm going to go for Calm Mind on the Aloe, because I really don't care if he knocks me off at this point. Like, +2 is just as good to me as +1 with Life Orb, so I'm going to go for Draco here. Unfortunately, don't quite pick up the KO on the Licky Licky, so he's going to go for Body Slam here. I clinch a little bit, because if I get parried, the game's basically over, but I do thankfully live that, as the Licky Licky is going to go down to the Psyshock the next turn. And unfortunately, I am kind of set up fodder for the Necrozma, so really kicking myself at this point in the game for not running a Eject Pack on my Latios over Life Orb, because I could have just dropped the Draco on Licky Licky, taken my damage, and got out into something like Metagross. Instead, he's going to be able to go for a Calm Mind with his Necrozma. I'm like, okay, as long as I get the Toxic, I'm fine. But he's Lumberry Necrozma. I'm like, oh boy, this is not a good situation, because he does have Dark Pulse, as we've seen. He's definitely got Photon Geyser on that set, and he's definitely got Roost, or Morning Sun, rather. So, again, I was pretty surprised he didn't have anything to hit Drapion, so maybe throwing away Drapion wasn't the play, but I was not expecting him to have no ground move on this Necrozma, and instead of having the Dark Pulse, so not ideal. I'm just going to have to kind of take my chip where I can get it with Arrow here and Revenge with Latios. Unfortunately, I miss my second Stone Edge as he goes for Morning Sun. Was this Dragon Dance? Oh, this was Dragon Dance Roost. Yeah, this was Dragon Dance Roost Edgequake Aerodactyl. So, missing that Stone Edge there, I was more so trying to condition him to go for Morning Sun, and then I was going to go for Dragon Dance the next turn, predicting another Morning Sun, and then hit the Stone Edge, or hopefully hit a Stone Edge, and make sure that this Necrozma is in range of a Draco Meteor. Unfortunately, missing that particular Stone Edge means that I'm not going to get the chance to go for that Dragon Dance, even if I would have missed one later. But here I'm going to make a weird play and go into Rotom Heat, which just dies, so I don't know why I threw that out. Really, my only hope at that point was to go for this roll with Latios, and it does seem to be a roll. He seems pretty offensively invested, so it's probably in my favor if it is a roll. But I'm able to KO the Necrozma there. I'm really kicking myself for throwing out Rotom Heat for no reason, because even with Rotom Heat around, I still had some chance, but throwing that thing out means that I basically just lose to Coco. Gonna go out to Mamoswine because I kind of have to. And then here, I figure I have to predict him to go out into either Aloe or Moltres and get a Roost off with my Latios, but he just stays in. So he might have been Shook a Berry on his Coco and knew he could take an Earthquake. Not really sure what his item was, and yeah, I can't win from this stage with Mamoswine since I am Choice Scarf. So good game to Hob. He just beat me. Like, I don't know what I was doing towards the end game there, but he made a nice play there, staying with the Coco. to dealing him again, and really good Necrozma set as it turned out. Again, kind of kicking myself for throwing out Drapion so foolishly when I had basically a free sub versus Aloe or Licky Licky at any point in the match, but we do go down and lose, so we're 6-4 for the season, but that is good enough for us to make playoffs. So we are actually the 8th seed coming into playoffs, but the way LD works is like the 1 and 2 seeds start in the semifinal game, and then everybody else has this kind of staggered play-in. So what it actually is 5 versus 8 and 6 versus 7 in the first round, quote unquote. Then the 2 and 3 seeds, or the 3 and 4 seeds, get a bye. 1 and 2 get 2 byes and play each other right before the finals. And then obviously from there it's just kind of normal bracket. So we are the 8th seed. We're getting a rematch against Noons, and I will upload that in a separate video. I can go more in depth on that game when we show it. But yeah, I'll upload that separately probably next week. So thank you guys very much for watching to this point. If you did, I know it was kind of a long video with the 4 games, but really appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you tune in for the next video. Thanks. Bye.